Across the United States, millions enter national parks every year, seeking silence, beauty, and escape. Most return with photographs and memories, but some never come back at all. Campsites are found still warm, tents zipped open but empty, fires still burning, and footprints that stop in the middle of a trail with no sign of where they lead. In dozens of these cases, the explanations offered by officials do not match the evidence on the ground. Reports are closed without answers, files are sealed, and witnesses are told they must be mistaken. What is happening deep in these protected lands, far beyond the roads and signs? Are these tragedies of nature, or is something else moving through the wild? Something that the Park Service would rather the public never know about? This is the story they don't tell you, and it begins here. Join us as we follow the disappearances no one can explain, the camp that vanished overnight. The first reports came just after sunrise on the 2nd of July 1980 from a remote section of national forest land in northern Colorado. The area was a well-used camping zone near Lost Creek, not far from where the tree line begins to thin and the mountains rise abruptly. Rangers on routine patrol noticed something strange. A campsite that had been occupied the previous evening was now completely empty. Tents were torn open from the side, gear was scattered across the clearing, and a half-burned fire still smouldered in the pit. The family of 3 who had been staying there, Mark and Ellen Davies, and their teenage son, Jacob, were gone. Their car remained parked at the trailhead. Their food and supplies were untouched. There was no sign they had packed up or left voluntarily. The Davies family had checked in with rangers 2 days earlier, planning a 4-night camping trip. They were familiar with the outdoors and had chosen a well-established site near a creek, about a mile from the nearest service road. A pair of backpackers camping half a mile away recalled seeing the family the previous evening, cooking dinner and playing cards by lantern light. Around 9:30 p.m, they heard what they later described as a single sharp scream, followed by silence. They assumed it was an animal noise. By morning, the Davies campsite was empty. The first responding ranger described the scene in his incident report as disturbed but not looted. 2 of the 3 tents had been slashed open horizontally, from ground level up, as though by something low to the ground or crouched. Sleeping bags were dragged several feet from their original positions. A cooler lay overturned near the fire pit, but none of the food was taken. A flashlight still burned on the ground beside the picnic table. The family's boots remained lined up by the entrance to their main tent. Only their personal items, watches, wallets, a set of car keys were missing, along with the people themselves. Search teams arrived within hours. They fanned out from the campsite in grid formations, sweeping the forest floor for signs of departure. About 30 yards from the clearing, investigators found what appeared to be drag marks, 2 parallel indentations in the soil leading downhill toward a dry creek bed. At the base of the slope, they discovered a torn scrap of synthetic fabric that matched the lining of one of the missing sleeping bags. Nearby, a bloodhound team alerted to a faint scent, which they followed for roughly 200 yards before losing it completely on a gravel service road. The absence of more definitive tracks raised immediate questions. The soil around the campsite was soft enough to retain clear boot prints, including those of the responding rangers, yet none matching the Davies family's shoes were found leading away. There were no signs of a struggle beyond the torn tents and scattered gear. Wildlife biologists examined the site and concluded the damage was inconsistent with known predators. A bear, they explained, typically tears tents vertically, searching for food. A mountain lion's attack would likely leave blood or drag marks leading to a den. The absence of such evidence and the fact that none of the food was taken ruled out the most obvious explanations. Helicopters with infrared sensors flew search patterns over a 1-2 square mile radius. Divers probed the nearby creek and deeper pools downstream. Teams rappelled into ravines, crawled through abandoned mine shafts, and scanned overhanging ledges with binoculars. Despite hundreds of volunteers and more than a week of continuous searching, no trace of the Davies family was ever found. Their clothes, their bodies, their belongings, everything had vanished. Rangers soon encountered another puzzle. On the second day of the search, a sheriff's deputy canvassing a Forest Service road reported finding a strange set of impressions about 5 miles from the campsite. They appeared to be barefoot human footprints, larger than average, with an unusually long stride leading from the tree line to the edge of the road and then disappearing into the hard-packed gravel. They were never matched to anyone involved in the case. In their final incident report, Park investigators offered three potential explanations. The family may have become lost and perished somewhere beyond the search perimeter. They may have been abducted by an unknown party, or they may have fallen victim to an undocumented predator. None of those theories accounted for the evidence at the scene: the precise slashing of the tents, the untouched food, the lack of human tracks, or the sudden termination of the scent trail. Years later, documents released through a public records request revealed that some investigators had privately raised more troubling possibilities. One ranger's memo noted that the scene suggested removal rather than flight, citing the absence of belongings usually dropped in panic. Another mentioned the possibility that more than one individual had been involved, given the differing directions of the drag marks and the spacing of the footprints. None of these notes were included in the official summary. The Davies disappearance was quietly closed the following spring, with the case file marked inconclusive. It remains open to public speculation. Some believe the family encountered poachers or an illegal mining operation and were abducted. Others suggest they may have stumbled upon something they were not meant to see, though no evidence has ever supported that idea. A smaller group points to the barefoot tracks and the strange tearing of the tents, arguing that the explanation lies outside conventional categories altogether. Today, the Lost Creek site looks unchanged. The clearing still hosts weekend campers. The picnic table, replaced twice since 1980, still sits beside the firing. The creek still winds past the stand of pines that sheltered the Davies' last known campsite. Hikers pass by without noticing the small brass plaque nailed to a nearby tree. 3 names, a single date, and the word missing. There are no warnings posted, no explanations offered. The Forest Service no longer discusses the incident publicly. Inquiries are referred to a short 2-paragraph statement issued more than 40 years ago. After an extensive search, no evidence of foul play or animal attack was found. The investigation remains ongoing. That sentence is still printed verbatim in the park's internal training manual, a case study with no conclusion. In the years since, similar incidents: tents ripped open without cause, campsites abandoned with food untouched, scent trails that end abruptly on roads, have appeared in scattered reports from parks across the country. Each is treated as isolated, each investigated briefly, and each eventually closed without resolution. But those who work the backcountry know the truth. Once the campsite falls silent, there is rarely anything left to find. The campers who walked into the dark. The trail into High Timber Lake is short, barely 2 miles from the service road, but the forest that surrounds it grows dense and quiet once the path bends away from the asphalt. In August 1993, 4 friends from Denver Michelle and David Phelps, and siblings Laura and Ian Brooks, set up camp on the lake's eastern shore. They were experienced backpackers, part of a university hiking club, and they had come to spend 3 nights under the stars before the semester began. Weather reports were calm. Their gear was standard: 2 dome tents, a small cook stove, and a shared journal they used to record their trips. The first 2 days were uneventful: fishing in the mornings, short hikes in the afternoons. On the 3rd night, something changed. A park ranger making rounds the following afternoon noticed their fire still burning. At first he thought they had simply gone for a walk, but as he approached the site, details began to feel wrong. 4 chairs circled the fire, but 2 were overturned. Pots and plates were scattered on the ground, one still half filled with beans and rice. The tents stood unzipped but undisturbed. Backpacks were inside, sleeping bags still rolled. One tent flap was torn slightly near the bottom, as if pulled outward. A camera sat on a folding stool, its lens cap removed. The group's journal lay open by the fire, the last entry unfinished, ending mid-sentence with the word hearing. Initial searches covered the immediate area: the lakeshore, a short slope leading down to a stream, and the first mile of the trail. Nothing. No footprints led away from camp, no signs of a scuffle. Even the sandy edge of the lake, which should have preserved impressions, was smooth. Rangers expanded their search. 200 yards from camp, they found a single boot print matching Michelle's size and brand, but it pointed back toward the lake, not into the woods. Beyond that, there were no tracks at all. A scent dog was brought in from a nearby county. It circled the campsite twice before following a faint trail through the trees to the south. The trail wound for nearly half a mile before stopping abruptly in a rocky clearing. There were no prints on the rocks, no fibers, no dropped gear. The dog barked once, turned in a tight circle, and refused to continue. Searchers marked the spot and moved on. On the 2nd day, a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging flew a 5-mile radius around High Timber Lake. It detected 3 heat signatures in a ravine about 1.8 miles east, but when ground teams arrived, they found only deer. A second aerial scan showed nothing at all. Divers checked the lake's deeper sections. The water was cold and clear, visibility nearly 30 feet. Nothing surfaced. Investigators pieced together what little they had. The last confirmed sighting of the group was by another pair of hikers around 6:15 p.m. on the night they disappeared. They had passed the campsite and exchanged a few words. Everyone seemed relaxed, preparing dinner by the fire. By 10 a.m. the next morning, the ranger found the abandoned camp. Sometime during those 16 hours, all 4 adults vanished without a trace. The most puzzling detail was the state of the campsite. It showed no signs of panic or hurried departure. All gear was present except for 1 set of boots and 2 flashlights. Their car remained parked at the trailhead with the keys inside. The journal's last entry, "Hearing," became the most debated piece of evidence. Forensic examination confirmed that Michelle had written it, likely within hours of their disappearance. Investigators speculated she may have been describing an animal sound or a distant voice, but there was no way to know. Wildlife officers examined the site for signs of predators. A bear would have overturned containers and scattered food. A mountain lion would likely leave drag marks, blood, or partial remains. None of these were present. Rangers noted that the partial tear in the tent's fabric was unusually straight and clean, more like a cut than a claw mark. Yet no knife or sharp tool was missing. The case took a stranger turn 3 days later when a local hunter came forward with a statement. While scouting near an old fire road 2 miles north of the campsite, he claimed to have seen 4 figures walking in a single file line just before dawn on the morning. The group vanished. He said they were silent, moving steadily uphill, and that one appeared to be barefoot. By the time he circled toward their path, they were gone. The terrain there was rocky and dry. Search teams found no prints, no clothing, and no discarded items. Official theories shifted over the following months. Early on, investigators suggested the group may have gotten lost during a night hike and succumbed to exposure. But weather conditions were mild, and none of the hikers had medical issues that would explain a collective disappearance. Foul play was considered, yet there were no signs of a struggle, no ransom demands, and no evidence of theft. Some speculated the group had staged their disappearance, but their bank accounts, jobs, and families all indicated they had no reason to flee. Internal documents released decades later show that not all investigators agreed with the public explanation. One ranger wrote in his field notes that the behavioral evidence suggests they left together, possibly under duress. Another noted the absence of secondary signs: no broken branches, no signs of campfire preparation elsewhere, and no known sightings beyond the hunter's account. The trail simply ended. By the summer of 1994, the case was closed, with the classification missing presumed dead, yet no bodies were ever found. In 2017, a private search and rescue team using modern drones and ground-penetrating radar surveyed the area again. They found nothing new. The campsite remains a place of quiet curiosity for passing hikers. The torn tent flap has long since been removed, but the fire ring, the lake, and the trail look almost identical to how they did that summer. Today, the High Timber Lake incident is still used in ranger training seminars as an example of a clean disappearance, a case where evidence leads nowhere, where every explanation fails to account for the details, and where 4 experienced campers simply walked into the dark and did not return. The journal that stopped at midnight. The campsite lay in a shallow valley, surrounded by old-growth cedar and pine, about 6 miles inside the northern edge of the Cascades. It was remote, but not inaccessible, reachable by a dirt road and a short trail used by anglers and backpackers. On the afternoon of the 23rd of July 1987, the Lorson family, Thomas and Caroline, and their 2 children, Daniel and Elise, arrived to begin a week-long camping trip. They were seasoned campers who had spent nearly every summer exploring national parks across the Northwest. Their setup was orderly and well-planned. 2 canvas tents, a fold-out cooking table, a kerosene lamp, and a field journal Caroline had been keeping for years, recording details from each of their trips. For the first 3 days, the journal entries followed a familiar rhythm: sketches of the surrounding hills, notes on wildlife sightings, a mention of rain showers, and how Daniel caught a small trout in the creek. Everything appeared normal. On the 4th evening, though, the writing took an unusual turn. Caroline noted that the family had seen strange lights over the treetops just after sunset. She described them as soft, pulsing orbs, pale green and white, moving in a slow arc above the ridge. They assumed at first that they were flares or aircraft, but the lights did not behave like either. One entry reads, "Daniel says they moved together, then apart, then stopped entirely. They hovered for a long time." The next day's entry is shorter, written just before midnight. It mentions a deep vibration that passed through the ground, shaking the lantern on the table, followed by what Caroline called a distant humming that lasted almost 10 minutes. The final line of the journal is written in hurried, uneven handwriting. 12:03 a.m. hearing. It ends there, mid-word, mid-sentence. The campsite was discovered the following afternoon by a forestry technician surveying nearby drainage channels. From a distance, it looked undisturbed. The tents were still standing. The lantern still sat on the table, unlit. Pots of water and half-prepared food remained where they had been left. Inside one tent, the sleeping bags were neatly laid out but empty. Caroline's journal was on the picnic table, its final page still open to the incomplete entry. The family's vehicle remained parked at the trailhead with the keys inside. Rangers were called immediately. The search that followed was extensive, covering several square miles of rugged terrain. Search teams followed faint footprints leading away from the camp for about 150 feet before they vanished into a patch of bare rock. Scent dogs traced the family's trail to that same point, but were unable to follow it further. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, no broken gear. The scene looked as if the Lorsons had simply stood up and walked away in the middle of the night. On the second day of the search, a helicopter equipped with infrared sensors detected a faint heat signature roughly 2 miles northeast of the site. Ground teams were dispatched, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing, no people, no footprints, no campfire. A second sweep yielded similar results. Investigators found a single footprint belonging to a child near a ridgeline, but no others nearby. It was as though someone had stepped down from above and vanished again. Theories emerged quickly. Some believed the family had left camp to investigate the lights described in the journal and had become lost. Others speculated that they had fallen victim to an animal encounter, though wildlife experts found no evidence of predation. The most common explanation, listed in the official report, was that the family had been disoriented in the darkness and wandered too far from camp. But even that theory failed to explain why their flashlights, boots, and outerwear, all essential for night travel, were left behind. The lights, mentioned in the journal, became a central point of debate. Investigators initially suggested they might have been flares from a distant logging operation. Air traffic records, however, showed no flights in the area that night. There were no scheduled forestry burns, no known drone operations, and no weather phenomena that could account for the description. The vibration noted just before the disappearance also remained unexplained. Seismic sensors in the region recorded no tremors at that time. In 1995, nearly 8 years after the disappearance, a hiker discovered a weathered canvas backpack containing 2 of the Lorson family's enamel camping mugs and a water bottle. It was found roughly 6 miles east of the original campsite in a steep, heavily forested area that search teams had already combed multiple times. The pack offered no new clues. No human remains have ever been located. The journal, meanwhile, has become one of the most discussed pieces of evidence in any disappearance case involving a US national park. The handwriting analysis confirmed that the final entry was written quickly, likely in a state of agitation. The last word, hearing, was underlined as if the pen had been dragged across the page mid-motion. Investigators never determined what the Lorson family might have been hearing. Today, the clearing where the Lorsons camped remains open to visitors, though few stay overnight. Rangers no longer mention the case on guided tours, and inquiries are met with a standard response. The investigation remains ongoing, and no evidence of foul play has been found. Yet the journal remains archived in a climate-controlled evidence room, its final page unchanged, a sentence that stops in the middle of the night and has never been finished. Those who have visited the site since often report a peculiar stillness around it, a silence that deepens after dark. Some describe faint humming on windless nights. Others insist they have seen pale lights above the ridge. None of these accounts have ever been verified. But the final entry in Caroline Lorson's journal, time-stamped at 12:03 a.m., remains one of the most haunting artifacts in the history of national park disappearances. The fire pit still warm. On the morning of the 8th of September, 2001, 2 hunters following a game trail in the Bitterroot range of western Montana came across a scene that, at first, looked completely ordinary. A campsite freshly used, sat in a clearing beside a small river, tents pitched neatly, coolers stacked by a log, and a fire still burning low in a circle of stones. The coals glowed bright orange, throwing wisps of smoke into the cold mountain air. But something was wrong. The campsite was empty. 4 people, college friends from Missoula, were supposed to be there. Their truck was parked at the trailhead, a half-mile away. Their gear was still arranged exactly as it had been used the night before, and yet there was no sign of anyone. The group identified as Michael Grayson, 27, Lucas Hall, 26, and sisters Marla and Andrea Kent, both in their 20s, had left on a long weekend trip 3 days earlier. They were experienced outdoorsmen and women, frequent campers who often visited this same stretch of forest each autumn. The last anyone heard from them was a phone call made from a gas station in Hamilton on the morning of September 6th. They planned to camp 2 nights and return Sunday evening. They never came back. The hunters who discovered the site waited several hours, assuming the group might have gone fishing or hiking nearby. When no one returned by noon, they hiked back to the ranger station and reported what they had found. A search team was deployed within hours. What they encountered at the clearing puzzled investigators from the start. The campfire was still alive, as though someone had left less than an hour earlier. A pot of coffee sat beside it, half full and still warm. 2 folding chairs faced the fire pit, one tipped backward. The tents were zipped open, sleeping bags pulled halfway out, as if they had been left in a hurry. Backpacks, jackets and boots were neatly arranged near the tent flaps. Even the group's cooler remained closed and full of food. The absence of personal belongings, wallets, phones or keys suggested they had not walked away voluntarily. The first search effort spread outward from the camp in a 5-mile radius. Teams followed faint impressions in the mud leading south, but they faded quickly on rocky ground. A canine unit picked up a scent trail that followed the river downstream for roughly half a mile before abruptly stopping at a shallow bend. No tracks continued beyond it. No drag marks or signs of a struggle were found. One searcher later noted that the trail ended as if they had simply lifted off the ground. Investigators soon uncovered something even stranger. One of the group's disposable cameras, still loaded with undeveloped film, lay on a folding table near the fire. When processed, the final photos revealed nothing unusual at first. Group shots around the fire, a series of candid images from the afternoon before, and one picture of the tree line taken just after dusk. But the last photo, time-stamped 11:42 p.m., showed something unusual. In the far left corner, partially obscured by brush, was a faint, elongated shape, upright, pale, and difficult to identify. The camera's flash had caught its outline as it moved between trees. None of the friends had mentioned seeing anything unusual in their notes or belongings. Searchers extended their sweep beyond the immediate site. Helicopters with infrared sensors flew repeated passes over the surrounding forest, picking up nothing. Teams waded through the river, probing the banks for evidence of anyone crossing. No torn clothing, no footprints, no discarded gear. Divers checked deeper sections of the water downstream, all clear. Even cadaver dogs brought in from out of state failed to alert on any trace of human remains. The investigation eventually turned to interviews. Other campers staying in the region that weekend reported hearing shouting near the river late Saturday night, brief and indistinct, but loud enough to carry through the trees. One couple said they heard something else about 30 minutes later, a deep, pulsing sound that faded after a few minutes. Rangers dismissed the description as likely wind in the gorge, but the couple insisted they had never heard anything like it before. The final movements of the group remained speculative. Some investigators suggested they might have left camp to investigate something they heard or saw and become lost. But none of their flashlights were missing, and the temperature had dropped to near freezing that night, too cold to wander without boots or coats. Others proposed that they may have entered the river and been swept away, though no bodies ever surfaced, and no drag marks were found on the muddy bank. A more unsettling theory emerged internally, hinted at in one ranger's handwritten notes. Site evidence indicates abrupt departure, fire maintained, gear undisturbed, behavior inconsistent with voluntary movement. The official report released the following year listed the incident as an unresolved disappearance. A final note read simply, "No indication of foul play, animal involvement, or intentional flight." Yet many of the original investigators admitted privately that they had never seen a case quite like it. Fires are almost always extinguished when campers leave even briefly. Coffee is not left half-finished. Cameras are not abandoned mid-roll, and people do not simply vanish from the middle of a campsite with a fire still burning. In 2014, a search and rescue volunteer hiking in the area discovered a torn scrap of nylon fabric snagged on a tree branch 2 miles from the original site. It was tested and found to match one of the missing tents, but no other evidence was recovered nearby. The find reignited public interest for a few weeks, but with nothing else to investigate, the case remained where it had been for more than a decade, unresolved. Today, the clearing near the Bitterroot remains accessible, though few campers choose to stay there overnight. The firing is still visible, stones blackened from decades of use. Occasionally, hikers who pass through note the odd hush that settles there after dark, a silence so complete it seems unnatural. And somewhere in an evidence locker, the final photo from that disposable camera remains sealed in a manila folder, its faint, blurred shape still moving among the trees. The Vanishing on Ridgeline Road. The last known phone call came at 11:27 p.m. on the 15th of October 2010. It was short, barely 90 seconds long, but the details were strange enough that the friend who received it later described the tone as nervous, not panicked, just off. On the other end of the line was Jenna Lewis, 29, calling from a remote campsite off Ridgeline Road, a narrow forest service route winding through the northern Sierra foothills. She and her boyfriend, Daniel Ortiz, 31, had driven there after work to spend a quiet weekend under the stars. The road was known among locals for its isolation, no ranger stations nearby, no cell towers beyond the ridges. It was a place where people went to be alone. Jenna told her friend they were about to turn in for the night when they noticed something pacing along the tree line, about 50 feet from their fire. At first, they assumed it was a deer, but it moved differently, slower, more deliberate, always just beyond the reach of the light. When Daniel shone a flashlight toward the sound, the movement stopped. A minute later, it started again, circling wider. "We're probably being paranoid," Jenna said, "but it's weird. It's been there for almost half an hour." The call ended abruptly when Daniel said he was going to check it out. The following afternoon, a Forest Service truck came across the couple's vehicle, still parked at the pull-off. The driver's side door was open, the keys in the ignition, and the engine still idling on an empty tank. The headlights had burned themselves out. A folding chair lay overturned beside a cold fire pit. Their tent was zipped open, sleeping bags still laid out, but no one was inside. Food, gear, and clothes remained neatly arranged. Their phones were found on the tailgate of the truck, one with a half-typed message unsent. "It's back again." Investigators determined that the couple had arrived at the site just before sunset on October 15th. A passing motorist recalled seeing their truck pull off the road around 7 p.m. A second witness, a hunter leaving the forest near midnight, reported noticing a flickering fire at the same location, but no movement or voices. When the vehicle was discovered the next afternoon, it had likely been running for over 14 hours. Search teams began scouring the area that evening. Dogs quickly picked up a scent trail leading away from the campsite and down a slope toward a dense stand of Douglas fir. The trail continued for nearly 400 yards before stopping abruptly at the edge of a clearing. There, searchers found a single boot print belonging to Daniel, deeply pressed into the soil, as though he had jumped or stumbled. No other prints, human or animal, were found beyond that point. About 200 feet from the print, investigators discovered a shredded piece of nylon tent fabric snagged on a low branch. Its fibers were torn in a way that analysts later described as mechanically inconsistent, not sliced, not chewed, but ripped by force applied in multiple directions at once. The fabric was later confirmed to match the couple's tent. Beyond that, there were no additional clues. Infrared-equipped helicopters surveyed the surrounding forest over the next 3 days, but found no heat signatures larger than small animals. Aerial searches extended to the nearby river valleys, while divers checked several deep pools downstream. No sign of either Jenna or Daniel was found. The weather remained clear, visibility high, and temperatures mild, all conditions that should have made them easy to locate if they were lost. Yet not a single trace surfaced. Rangers began to piece together a timeline based on the available evidence. The last phone call ended at 11:28 p.m. At approximately 11:31 p.m., Jenna's phone recorded a missed incoming text. At 11:32, Daniel's phone attempted to place a call, but failed to connect. The unsent message on Jenna's phone was timestamped at 11:35. After that, there was no further activity. The idling truck suggested they had returned to the vehicle, or someone had after those final moments. But why neither phone had left the tailgate, or why the truck was never driven away, remains unexplained. Neighbors, living several miles down Ridgeline Road, reported unusual sounds that night. One described a low, pulsing hum around midnight. Another claimed to have heard 3 sharp metallic bangs echoing from the canyon shortly after 12 a.m. A third witness, a trucker passing through at 2:15 a.m., reported seeing a moving light in the tree line near the pull-off, though his dash camera failed to capture it clearly. None of these reports were verified, but they remain in the official incident log. The investigation eventually focused on 3 main possibilities. One was that the couple encountered a large predator and fled, becoming lost in the dense terrain. Wildlife biologists, however, found no evidence of predatory activity, no claw marks, no blood, and no drag signs. Another theory was foul play, a third party ambushing them, but the undisturbed state of the site and lack of theft made this unlikely. The third possibility was that they left voluntarily, but the absence of money, identification, or transport made that difficult to accept. Years later, a private search team, using ground-penetrating radar, scanned portions of the area and found 2 irregular soil disturbances several hundred yards from the original site. Excavation revealed nothing, no remains, no objects, nothing to connect to the disappearance. The case remains active but cold, with no confirmed sightings and no further evidence discovered. Ridgeline Road is still open to the public, though many locals avoid the pull-off entirely. The campsite itself is almost untouched, marked only by a small wooden sign warning visitors to stay aware of surroundings. Rangers rarely discuss the incident, and official park literature refers to it only as an unexplained absence. Yet the details remain etched into the record: an idling truck, 2 half-packed bags, a fire burned to ash, and the faint imprint of a boot leading nowhere. To this day, the last known words from either of them remain that half-typed message, never sent and still preserved in the evidence file: "It's back again." The camp beside the waterfall. The trail to Cedar Falls is not particularly long, but by the time it reaches the water, most of the noise of the world is gone. The constant rush of the falls fills the canyon, echoing off granite walls and drowning out every other sound, even footsteps. It was here, on a narrow ledge above the plunge pool, that 2 friends from Spokane, Richard Harmon and Caleb West, set up camp in July 1999. They had come for a long weekend of fishing and photography, a trip they had planned for months. The site they chose was known only to locals, a small clearing beside the stream that fed the waterfall, accessible only by a steep, unmarked path. It was a place where people rarely camped, and almost never by accident. Both men were experienced in the backcountry. Richard, 32, worked as a surveyor and spent much of his time in remote terrain. Caleb, 30, was an avid outdoorsman and volunteer search and rescue member. They carried quality gear, proper maps, and enough provisions for 4 days. On July 15, they radioed a friend to confirm they had arrived safely and were planning to fish the lower creek the following morning. It was the last confirmed contact anyone had with them. 4 days later, when they failed to return home, a small search team followed their planned route. They found the campsite exactly as it should have been: tents intact, sleeping bags unrolled, and a coffee pot sitting on a cold fire ring. Fishing poles leaned against a tree, still threaded with line. One of Caleb's boots rested by the tent flap, the other missing. Their backpacks remained fully packed. Food was left out on the folding table, half prepared for a meal that was never finished. What drew the most attention, however, was a single boot, the one that had vanished, wedged high in the crook of a pine tree, almost 12 feet above the ground. It was still laced and showed no signs of animal damage. Investigators were unable to explain how it had gotten there. The ground below bore no marks of climbing, no disturbed soil, and no broken branches. There were no prints leading to the tree at all. The search extended downstream, where the terrain narrowed into steep rock channels and overhanging ledges. Roughly 300 yards from camp, trackers found a single fishing lure caught in a sapling 10 feet from the water's edge. They followed the creek another half mile before encountering drag-like marks in the soil-shallow grooves, parallel, stretching 30 feet before stopping abruptly. Dogs brought in from a nearby county followed a faint scent trail from that point, but lost it less than 50 yards downstream. The waterfall itself was carefully examined. Divers searched the plunge pool, a deep basin over 20 feet across, and found nothing. Sonar sweeps of the underwater channels showed no obstructions, and no human remains were ever recovered. Even more puzzling was the lack of any sign that the 2 men had attempted to leave the area. Their vehicle remained parked at the trailhead. No bank accounts were accessed, and neither man had spoken to anyone since their final radio call. Several details from the site raised questions investigators were never able to answer. The missing boot in the tree, the cooking gear left mid-preparation, the fishing rods positioned upright, as if the men had intended to return within minutes. None of it matched the usual signs of hikers swept away by water or attacked by animals. There was no blood, no torn fabric, no broken branches, no signs of a struggle. Whatever happened, it appeared to have occurred quickly and without warning. A witness report added another layer to the mystery. A pair of hikers camping a mile downstream claimed they heard shouting, echoing through the canyon, shortly after midnight on July 16. The waterfall made it impossible to make out words, but they described it as angry or frightened. About 10 minutes later, they heard what they believed was a splash loud enough to rise above the falls, followed by complete silence. They assumed it was someone night fishing or swimming and did not investigate. In the weeks that followed, the investigation shifted toward potential foul play. The steep approach trail was checked for signs of other visitors, but none were found. The only boot prints in the area belonged to the two missing men. There were no signs of forced entry into their vehicle and no indications that valuables had been taken from the campsite. The drag marks near the creek bank suggested something or someone had been moved, but nothing downstream supported that conclusion. Theories varied. Some believed the two men slipped while fishing and were swept away, but their rods and tackle remained untouched and no evidence of a fall existed. Others suggested an animal encounter, but the absence of tracks, scat, or disturbed vegetation ruled that out. A third theory suggested foul play by unknown individuals, yet nothing was stolen and no secondary camp or evidence of human activity was ever discovered. A search and rescue veteran who assisted with the case later remarked that it looked less like they left and more like they were removed. The odd placement of the boot, the sudden end of the scent trail, and the unaltered state of the camp all supported that impression. But without physical evidence, the official conclusion remained missing presumed deceased. Over 2 decades later, the Cedar Falls site remains largely untouched. Rangers visit periodically, but few campers choose to stay overnight. The boot found in the tree is still kept in an evidence locker, its laces stiff and its sole marked only by the moss and resin of the pine that held it. The drag marks have long since been washed away by spring runoff, and the fishing lure still hangs rusted from its sapling. The sound of the falls continues, drowning out everything else, including the unanswered question of what happened beside them. The silent perimeter. The canyon floor near Maple Ridge had long been considered one of the most remote corners of the state's protected forest, a place where the silence felt heavy and where even experienced hikers often remarked that the woods seemed to listen back. It was precisely that isolation that drew 3 amateur wildlife researchers, brothers Adam and Nathan Cole, and their colleague Laura Chen, to the site in May 2007. They were not casual campers. The trip was part of an ongoing project to document nocturnal predators in the region. They brought with them a range of equipment: trail cameras, thermal sensors, motion, triggered microphones, and a portable logging station to record everything through the night. They had spent the previous summer in the same location without incident. The team arrived on May 14 and established their camp on a flat rise overlooking the canyon floor. The site was chosen for its clear lines of sight and proximity to an animal trail they hoped to monitor. They erected 3 tents in a loose semicircle, built a small cooking area, and arranged their monitoring gear in a perimeter roughly 50 yards out. Each camera was positioned to capture movement from multiple angles. Infrared trip sensors were placed along key paths leading to the site. A motion-activated microphone was installed near the center of the clearing. They began collecting data the first night. For 2 days, their field notes, later recovered from a waterproof case, recorded nothing unusual. The journal described small animals triggering the cameras, a few deer passing through, and 1 brief thermal signature, likely belonging to a bear. On the 3rd night, however, the entries grew more curious. At 11:42 p.m. on May 16, Adam noted a faint rhythmic sound coming from the northeast quadrant. It was described as footstep-like but irregular, occurring in short bursts and then stopping. The team repositioned one of the thermal cameras towards the sound source, but captured nothing. At 2:17 a.m., the microphone recorded 3 distinct human-like steps approaching the perimeter, then nothing. There was no follow-up movement, no other sounds, and no sign of entry into the camp. The journal notes that they discussed moving one of the cameras closer to investigate, but decided to wait until daylight. That was the last entry. The next morning, a ranger on a scheduled patrol noticed the group's truck parked at the trailhead, but no sign of activity at the logging station. By evening, when they still hadn't returned, a search party followed their marked path into the canyon. What they found appeared ordinary at first glance. The camp was intact tents standing, sleeping bags unzipped but unused, and gear stacked neatly by the fire pit. Cooking utensils lay beside a pan of oats that had boiled dry on the stove. The logging station still hummed quietly, data blinking on its screen. There was no sign of the three researchers. The motion sensors told their own story. Sometime around 3:12 a.m., nearly an hour after the footsteps had been recorded, the sensors on the west and north perimeter tripped in quick succession, just seconds apart. Cameras aimed at those locations triggered automatically. Yet when investigators reviewed the footage, they found nothing. The frames showed the clearing, the edge of the tree line, and empty space. No figures, no animals, no movement, just stillness. One camera, positioned higher on a slope and aimed downward, caught something slightly different. 4 frames each less than a second long showed faint distortions near the ground, like heat ripples or blurred shapes. Analysts later concluded the camera lens may have fogged briefly, though no condensation was found. The search effort lasted more than 2 weeks. Teams scoured the canyon and the ridges beyond, combing drainages and abandoned logging roads. Helicopters with thermal imaging swept the surrounding valleys. Dogs followed faint trails that all seemed to end in the same place, a dry wash roughly 300 yards from camp. There, the scent abruptly vanished, as if the three had stepped off the ground entirely. A detail noted by one search team never made it into the official report. In the dry wash, they found 3 distinct depressions spaced evenly apart, roughly the size and shape of footprints, but deeper than normal, as if made by someone carrying heavy weight. They did not match any known boot tread used by the team. The impressions were cast in plaster and archived, but no matches were ever identified. Theories developed quickly. The official one was disorientation. Perhaps the researchers had followed a signal into the woods and become lost. Yet this failed to explain why their boots, packs, and navigational gear remained in camp. Another idea was that a large predator had entered the area and they fled. But motion cameras showed no sign of a bear, mountain lion, or any other large animal. Foul play was briefly considered, though there was no evidence of a struggle, no vehicle tracks, and no missing valuables. What remained most unsettling to investigators were the data logs themselves, the footsteps, the simultaneous triggering of sensors without visible cause, the thermal distortion frames. All of it suggested movement, deliberate, coordinated movement around the camp after 3 a.m. Yet nothing ever crossed the perimeter, nothing ever entered the tents, and nothing left behind a trace. By early June, the search was scaled back. The site was dismantled, the cameras and sensors collected as evidence, and the case officially closed as missing cause undetermined. Internally, several investigators admitted their unease. It looks like they were surrounded, one ranger wrote in a memo, but nothing ever touched the ground. Today, the Maple Ridge site remains unmarked. Hikers occasionally pass through, unaware that one of the most technologically documented disappearances in park history occurred there. The forest has reclaimed the clearing. The dry wash has filled with leaves and soil, yet the data stored on hard drives and locked away in evidence archives remains unchanged. A perimeter that recorded footsteps, movement, and presence, but not a single image of who or what was there. The cabin on the edge of the woods. The structure was barely more than a shell when they found it a single-room ranger outpost, half collapsed and long forgotten, hidden deep in a pocket of forest that most hikers never reached. It did not appear on any current maps, and the nearest maintained trail ended miles away. According to park records, the cabin had been built in the 1930 seconds as a seasonal fire lookout before flooding washed out the access road and forced its abandonment in the early 1950 seconds. Since then, it had sat in silence, surrounded by trees that had grown tall enough to hide it from above. On an August evening in 1984, 3 campers stumbled across it while looking for shelter from an approaching storm and vanished without a trace. Robert and Mary Sloan, both 25, and their friend David Latham, 24, had planned a 5-day trip into the backcountry before the start of the university term. They were seasoned hikers who had camped together many times before and carried appropriate gear for a remote expedition. Their permits showed they entered the park on August 18 and planned to hike a loop trail that would bring them back to their vehicle by August 22. They were last seen that afternoon at a ranger station about 12 miles from the cabin, where they spoke briefly with a patrol officer about weather conditions before heading deeper into the forest. 2 days later, a heavy storm system moved across the region. Wind gusts reached 40 miles per hour, and rain fell heavily throughout the night. Investigators believe it was during this storm that the group left their established campsite and followed an unmarked game trail uphill, likely seeking higher ground to avoid flooding. It was along that path, obscured by underbrush and decades of neglect, that they found the old ranger cabin. Mary's field journal, later recovered from the site, offers the last known words from any of them. A short entry dated August 20 reads, "Found an old cabin above the stream. Looks safe enough. We'll stay the night here and return to camp in the morning." The handwriting ends abruptly mid-sentence on the following page, with only the words, "Something strange with the walls," scribbled before the ink trails off. When the three failed to meet friends at the pickup point on August 22, a search began. Rangers located their original campsite intact and undisturbed. Cooking gear was stacked neatly, firewood collected, and 2 days' worth of food remained. From there, a faint trail of boot prints led northwest. About a mile beyond, searchers found the cabin. The interior scene raised more questions than answers. A cold fire pit in the corner contained fresh ash, suggesting it had burned within the past 2 days. 3 sleeping bags lay unzipped on the floor. Lanterns, cooking utensils and clothing were scattered about the room as if dropped in haste. A small table was overturned and splintered, and a lantern lay shattered nearby. Most unsettling were the marks on the wall's deep, vertical gouges carved into the wooden planks from floor to ceiling. They were too deep and too regular to have been made by rodents or clawed animals, yet they lacked the clean lines of tool marks. The discovery that unsettled searchers most was carved into the inside of the door, 3 words etched hastily into the wood in uneven block letters, "Don't follow." The search widened immediately. Teams swept the dense forest for miles in every direction. Bloodhounds tracked a faint scent north of the cabin for approximately 300 yards, before losing it near a steep drop-off. There, the soil showed signs of disturbance, flattened vegetation, and 3 shallow depressions, as though heavy objects had been dragged or set down. Beyond that point, the trail vanished. Helicopters scanned the area with thermal imaging. Divers searched downstream lakes and waterways. Nothing surfaced. Forensic analysis offered no clarity. The scratches on the walls contained no animal hair, no foreign material, and no consistent tool impressions. Investigators noted that some marks were fresher than others, suggesting they had been made over a span of time, possibly even before the trio's arrival. The carving on the door was made with a blade consistent with one of the missing campers' knives, but why they would leave a warning, and for whom, could not be determined. Theories began to multiply, none of them satisfying. One suggested the group had been attacked by a large predator, though the lack of blood, tracks, or torn fabric made this improbable. Another proposed that they had panicked during the storm and fled into the woods, becoming lost. But their boots, rain gear, and navigational tools remained inside. A third posited that they had been ambushed by other people, yet no secondary camps, footprints, cigarette butts, or tool marks were ever found in the surrounding area. One ranger's private notes, later obtained through a records request, described the scene in stark terms. Cabin shows signs of violent struggle, no evidence of forced entry. Message on door suggests fear of pursuit. Interior damage inconsistent with known wildlife behavior. Possible external agency involved. Those notes were never included in the final report. A discovery on the 3rd day of the search only deepened the mystery. Roughly 2 miles west of the cabin, a search party found a small cairn of stones stacked deliberately on a flat ridge. Beneath it lay a single torn scrap of fabric red flannel, later matched to the shirt Robert had been wearing. No other trace of the missing campers was found nearby. The official investigation concluded in early September. The case was closed as missing presumed deceased, citing likely disorientation and exposure during severe weather. But the evidence on the ground, the scratches, the overturned furniture, the cryptic warning, and the absence of any sign of departure has never fit comfortably within that explanation. Today, the cabin still stands, though time and weather have reduced it to a skeletal frame. Moss creeps across its roof, and its door hangs crooked on rusted hinges. Yet the faint outline of those 3 words remains carved into the wood, their edges softened by decades of rain. Don't follow. Most visitors to the region never see the structure. It remains unmarked, absent from park maps, and largely avoided even by rangers. Those who have ventured close describe a peculiar hush around it, a silence that seems to deepen as one approaches. No bodies were ever recovered, no confirmed sightings of the 3 campers were ever reported, and no theory, official or otherwise, has ever satisfactorily explained how 3 experienced hikers disappeared from a shelter only a mile from their established route, leaving behind a warning no one has ever understood. The case remains one of the most haunting in the park's archives, a story etched into a rotting door in the middle of a forest clearing, where a single sentence outlasted the people who wrote it. The clearing that wasn't there. The radio call came in at 9:18 p.m. on the 11th of July, 1995. It was short, calm, and slightly confused. Nothing in the voice suggested panic. "We're near camp, but something looks different," said Thomas Avery, a 3-4-year-old outdoor instructor from Oregon, speaking to a friend who was monitoring a handheld radio from a nearby trailhead. "There's a clearing here that wasn't here before. Whole section of trees is just gone." His last words were followed by a faint crackle of static, then silence. He never called again. Avery and his camping partner, Megan Lowe, 29, had been on a 3-day trip in the northern range of Pine Hollow Forest, an isolated region rarely visited even by experienced hikers. They'd been there before twice, in fact, and knew the terrain well. Their chosen campsite was in a shaded grove along a small stream, surrounded by thick cedar and alder. They hiked in on July 10, reported their location over radio that afternoon, and spent the night without incident. On the evening of the 11th, they checked in again, saying they had returned from a day hike and were preparing dinner. The clearing call came less than an hour later. When they missed their scheduled morning check-in the next day, park rangers launched a search. They found their vehicle parked, as expected, at the trailhead. The trail itself was undisturbed, and after a 2-mile hike into the forest, searchers located the campsite, or what should have been the campsite. The tent was still there, pitched neatly in the center of the clearing. Sleeping bags were laid out inside. A pot of stew sat cooling beside a cold fire pit. Lanterns and cookware were stacked beside a folding table, but the grove of trees that had once surrounded the site was gone. Rangers compared photos the pair had taken just 2 days earlier to the scene before them. Where dense forest had stood, there was now a ring of bare earth, extending roughly 80 feet in every direction. The perimeter was sharply defined, as if cut by a surveyor's compass. The remaining soil was dry and brittle, though it had rained lightly the night before. Charred remnants of roots protruded from the ground. Tree stumps showed no signs of chainsaw work, nor were there drag marks or tire tracks anywhere nearby. It was as if the trees had never existed at all. The tent itself was undisturbed. Inside, both sleeping bags were zipped open but empty. Avery's boots were by the entrance. Megan's were still tucked under the small folding chair where she had last been sitting. A flashlight lay on the ground beside it, switched on, but dead. Their water bottles, notebooks, and a map were scattered near the firing. The only thing missing was their radio, the same one used to report the clearing. The search operation intensified immediately. Dozens of volunteers, canine units, and helicopters combed a 10-mile radius around the site. Dogs followed a scent trail northwest for roughly half a mile before losing it abruptly in a rocky gulch. No footprints, blood, or broken branches marked the trail's end. A second team traced what they thought was a partial path leading east, but it dissolved into open ground without explanation. Investigators struggled to make sense of the clearing. Forestry experts consulted by the Park Service ruled out logging, lightning strikes, and blowdowns. The tree removal appeared too precise and too recent for natural causes. Soil samples revealed traces of intense heat, exposure enough to carbonize roots and alter mineral composition, but there had been no fires reported in the region. The air that night had been calm, and no storms capable of causing such damage were recorded. Several puzzling details emerged as the search continued. About 200 yards from the site, a ranger found a melted section of Megan's metal water bottle fused to a rock. Analysis showed it would have required temperatures far higher than any campfire could produce. Near the same spot, investigators found 3 small circular impressions in the ground, each about 8 inches wide, arranged in a perfect triangle. They were too symmetrical to be animal tracks and too shallow to be post holes. No one could explain them. Witness reports added more layers to the mystery. A pair of hikers 2 miles south of the site reported seeing a glow in the sky around 9:30 p.m. on the night Avery and Lowe vanished. They described it as pale orange and silent, lasting less than a minute before fading. A fire lookout stationed 15 miles away also recorded an anomalous light source that same night, noting its position almost directly above Pine Hollow. The report was filed and never followed up. By the end of July, the official investigation listed 3 working theories. The first suggested that the pair had wandered off at night and become lost, though it failed to explain the absence of tracks or the missing radio. The second proposed that a wildfire-related phenomenon, possibly a dry lightning burst, had scorched the area and disoriented them. Yet no burn perimeter beyond the clearing was found, and no smoke or flames were reported that night. The third theory, considered internally but never released to the public, speculated that an unknown external force, mechanical or otherwise, had altered the landscape. No evidence supported that theory either. The file was closed in November with the classification missing presumed deceased, but many within the search teams remained unconvinced. The site didn't look abandoned, one ranger later recalled. It looked reset, as if someone had come through and erased most of what was there. The story of Pine Hollow became a quiet legend among park staff. Rangers avoided camping near the site, and the area was eventually removed from official backcountry maps. Even today, hikers who stray into the region sometimes report strange sensations: a sudden stillness, a low vibration in the ground, or the faint smell of something burned. No new evidence has been found, and neither Thomas Avery nor Megan Lowe has ever been located. The clearing itself remains visible nearly 30 years later. Vegetation has tried to reclaim the space, but grows stunted and pale. A circle of younger trees marks the perimeter, but nothing taller than a shrub grows within. The tent and gear were removed long ago, though searchers left the cold fire ring intact. It sits in the center of the circle, a fixed reminder of a night when the forest itself seemed to change shape around 2 campers who saw something that wasn't there and then vanished into the silence that followed. The trail of ashes. The ranger who found it would later describe the scene as too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. It was the morning of the 12th of June 2012 when a search and rescue team followed a GPS signal into the lower section of Canyon Vista National Park, a region known for its sheer cliffs, twisting ravines, and difficult access. They were looking for 3 missing hikers, siblings Mark and Caroline Dorsey, and their friend Peter Hale, who had last been seen 4 days earlier. What they found instead was a campsite unlike any they had encountered before. No tents, no sleeping bags, no footprints, just a wide ring of blackened soil and a perfectly formed circle of ash that stretched more than 20 feet across. The 3 hikers had set out on June 7, planning a 6-day trek through the backcountry. Mark, 33, was an experienced mountaineer. Caroline, 30, had completed numerous multi-day hikes across the Rockies. Peter, 31, was a wilderness EMT and frequent volunteer with search and rescue operations. They had mapped their route carefully, checked in with rangers, and left a detailed itinerary with family. They were expected to exit the park by June 13. The first sign something was wrong came on June 11, when they failed to check in via satellite phone as scheduled. At first, rangers assumed poor reception common in the canyon's deeper valleys, but by the next day, with still no contact, a search was launched. Helicopters spotted what appeared to be a small burned patch near their intended campsite and dispatched a ground team. That was when they discovered the ring. The burn site was unlike a typical campfire. The soil was scorched in a near-perfect circle, extending 22 feet in diameter, yet the surrounding vegetation remained untouched. The ash inside was cool to the touch, as if whatever had burned had done so days before, yet thermal imaging suggested residual heat beneath the surface. At the center lay a smaller circle, no more than 5 feet across, where the ground was fused into a glassy crust, as if subjected to extreme temperatures. Investigators estimated the heat necessary to produce such fusion would have exceeded 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, far beyond the output of any campfire. Their gear was nowhere to be found. No tents, no food, no packs, not even cookware. Yet oddly, 3 titanium tent stakes were still driven into the ground, on the edge of the circle, evenly spaced, as though something had been anchored there. Nearby, a section of melted nylon rope dangled from a tree branch, fused into a hardened coil. A charred length of carbon trekking pole was recovered 70 feet away, its handle warped beyond recognition. What puzzled investigators most was the absence of any clear ignition source. No traces of accelerants were found, and there were no signs of lightning strikes. A meteorological report for that night showed clear skies, no storms, and no unusual electrical activity. A wildfire could not have caused such contained damage, and no lightning had been recorded in the region for weeks. Search dogs were brought to the scene but behaved strangely. 2 refused to enter the burned circle, whining and pacing at the perimeter. A third eventually crossed the edge but immediately lost the scent. Teams followed what they believed to be a faint trail northeast for nearly half a mile, but it ended abruptly in a wash of fine grey dust, as if the ground itself had been sifted clean. On June 14, rangers expanded the search. They canvassed a 15-mile radius with helicopters, drones and tracking teams. No remains, clothing or personal effects were recovered. However, one detail emerged 2 days later that deepened the mystery. Approximately 300 yards upstream from the burn site, searchers found a single boot sole separated cleanly from the rest of the shoe and lying atop a bed of fine ash. It showed no signs of fire damage. A second discovery followed. At the base of a sandstone ledge near the site, investigators located what appeared to be a spiral pattern etched into the soil 35 feet across, composed of shallow furrows roughly 3 inches deep. The pattern was not random. It formed a perfect logarithmic curve, continuous and uninterrupted. It was visible for less than a day before wind and rain erased it. Witness statements from the days surrounding the disappearance added unsettling details. A pair of campers roughly 3 miles east of the site reported seeing a pillar of light rise briefly from the canyon floor on the night of June 10, a pale column that lasted only seconds before vanishing. Another group, hiking on a ridge at dawn the next day, reported hearing what they described as a low humming echoing from below. Investigators dismissed both accounts as likely unrelated. Theories quickly developed, but none explained all the evidence. The official explanation proposed that the trio may have started a large fire for warmth or signaling, which then consumed their equipment. But this could not account for the extreme heat signatures, the fused soil, or the untouched vegetation. Another theory speculated that an illegal incendiary device, perhaps a flare or explosive, had been involved, yet no chemical residues were found, and no signs of blast pressure were present. Unofficial explanations were more speculative. Some investigators privately suggested that the hikers might have encountered a natural but rare geological event, a sudden methane vent ignition, or a ground-based plasma discharge, though neither phenomenon had ever been recorded in the park. A few even entertained the idea that the spiral symbol and ash pattern might be evidence of deliberate human activity. But no footprints, tire tracks, or drone debris were ever recovered. By late July, with no evidence of foul play or accident, the search was scaled back. The case was closed in September as missing presumed deceased, though no remains were ever found. The final report noted the ash ring as anomalous and recommended future study if similar incidents occurred. Today, the site remains inaccessible to the public. Rangers quietly rerouted nearby trails, and the location is omitted from most official maps. Yet those who know where to look say the land still bears scars. The soil is darker there, and nothing grows within the circle's boundary. Even more unsettling, some rangers claim their compasses behave erratically near the site, spinning unpredictably before correcting themselves once they step away. No trace of Mark, Caroline, or Peter has ever surfaced. Their families still leave flowers near the canyon overlook every June. All that remains of their final night is a scorched ring of earth, a fused circle of glass, and the memory of a campsite that should have held 3 tents, but instead held only ash, arranged in a pattern no one has ever been able to explain. The lights above Timber Ridge. The ridge earned its name for a reason. At nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, Timber Ridge was a windswept spine of rock and fir where the tree line thinned and the night sky felt impossibly close. It was remote even by backcountry standards, a place where weather shifted without warning and where hikers often spent days without seeing another person. It was here, in September 2004, that 4 campers pitched their tents in a narrow saddle just below the summit. All 4 were experienced outdoorsmen. All 4 vanished without a trace. The group brothers Michael and Aaron Duval, along with their friends Sarah Patel and Jonathan Reeves, had planned a week-long trip into the high country. They were seasoned trekkers, familiar with the area, and had filed a detailed route plan with the ranger station. Their itinerary placed them at Timber Ridge for 2 nights before continuing south toward a glacial basin. On the evening of September 13, they checked in via satellite phone to say they had reached the ridge without incident. Conditions were clear and temperatures hovered in the mid-40 seconds. That call would be the last. When they failed to contact family as scheduled 2 days later, a ranger patrol was dispatched. It took search teams nearly 24 hours to reach the ridge due to steep terrain and unpredictable winds. When they arrived, the camp appeared untouched. Tents stood zipped and intact. Sleeping bags were laid out. Cooking gear and food supplies remained organized. Even mugs of coffee, long gone cold, sat half full on a small folding table. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints led away from the site, no equipment was missing, and yet the 4 hikers were gone. One detail stood out immediately. The ground surrounding the tents was scorched not in a chaotic burned patch, but in a perfect ring, nearly 30 feet across. The soil was blackened and brittle, as if exposed to intense heat, but the tents and gear inside the circle were completely unharmed. Even the thin nylon fabric showed no signs of melting. It was as though the heat had stopped precisely at the boundary, leaving everything within untouched. Investigators catalogued the scene carefully. Soil samples taken from the scorched ring revealed chemical changes usually associated with high-temperature combustion temperatures, far exceeding anything produced by a campfire or stove. Yet there were no signs of accelerants or fuel residues. No trees nearby showed evidence of lightning strikes, and meteorological records confirmed there had been no storms in the area that week. As puzzling as the ground markings were, the most unsettling evidence came from a camera recovered at the site. Jonathan Reeves had set up a small digital camera on a tripod to capture time-lapse photos of the night sky. The camera was still running when searchers arrived. Most of the images showed nothing unusual, just stars wheeling overhead. But beginning at 2:13 a.m. on the morning of September 14, the photographs began capturing strange phenomena. In one frame, a diffuse glow appeared above the tree line, too low to be a star or satellite. In the next, the glow had separated into 4 distinct points of light, arranged in a perfect circle. Over the next 10 frames, about 90 seconds of real time, the lights appeared to rotate slowly clockwise, each frame capturing a slightly different angle. Then, just as suddenly, they were gone. The final image before the sequence ended showed the campsite faintly illuminated by an unknown light source, though investigators could not determine its origin. The camera battery died minutes later. There were no photographs of the campers themselves after that point. Witness statements from hikers several miles away added further intrigue. 2 separate groups reported seeing unusual lights over Timber Ridge that same night, bright, silent, and stationary. One hiker described them as a perfect ring hovering above the ridgeline. Another recalled that his compass began spinning erratically as he watched. Rangers initially dismissed these reports as misidentified aircraft or meteor activity, but aviation logs showed no flights over the region that night, and no meteor showers were forecast. Search efforts stretched for weeks. Helicopters scanned miles of alpine forest. Ground teams combed every ravine and basin. Divers explored glacial lakes. Cadaver dogs were deployed repeatedly, but found nothing. No clothing, no equipment, no remains. It was as if the 4 hikers had stepped out of existence. A few anomalies were documented during the search. Roughly 200 yards from the main campsite, a search team found a series of shallow impressions in the soil, evenly spaced, circular, and about 4 inches deep. They formed a ring pattern roughly matching the size and orientation of the scorched circle around the tents. Their source was never determined. At another site, a tree's upper branches were singed and brittle, despite no sign of fire on the ground below. The official report, released 6 months later, offered few answers. It noted that the scorch pattern did not match any known environmental phenomenon and that thermal evidence suggests temperatures inconsistent with atmospheric lightning or human-made combustion. The disappearance was ultimately classified as missing cause undetermined. Unofficially, many within the investigation admitted they had never encountered anything like it. Some theories were mundane: a sudden lightning discharge, a gas vent ignition, or even a concealed wildfire flare-up. But none accounted for the perfect geometry of the scorched ring, the absence of damage within its boundary, or the lights captured in the time-lapse photos. Other explanations veered into speculation, everything from top-secret aerial tests to unexplained atmospheric phenomena. None were supported by evidence. Today, Timber Ridge is still accessible to hikers, but most avoid camping near the saddle, where the Duval party disappeared. Vegetation still refuses to grow evenly in the scorched ring, and compasses occasionally behave unpredictably within a few yards of the site. Rangers patrol the area infrequently and offer no warnings beyond a brief mention of unstable weather conditions in the backcountry guide. The missing hikers were never found. Their families still leave messages at the trailhead every September, laminated photographs and handwritten notes weighted under stones. The time-lapse camera remains in evidence storage, its final sequence of images showing 4 points of light turning silently over a campsite that should have been ordinary, a night under the stars like any other. Yet by morning, 4 people were gone, and the ground itself bore marks that no one could explain. The man who came back alone. The story began like countless others. 3 friends, a long weekend, and a stretch of wilderness they thought they knew well. On the 3rd of September 1989, Michael Whitaker, 29, and his 2 closest friends, James Harlan and Daniel "Danny" Ross, both 30, left their small town in Oregon for a camping trip in the national forest 2 hours east. They had chosen a remote section of the high hollow backcountry, a place they had visited several times before. All 3 were experienced outdoorsmen. They brought proper gear, maps, radios, and enough supplies for 5 days. According to everyone who spoke to them before they left, there was nothing unusual about the trip. It was supposed to be a routine end of summer getaway. Only one of them came back. Michael was found wandering along a service road 8 days later, barefoot, dehydrated, and disoriented. He was picked up by a passing utility worker who described him as vacant, like he didn't know where he was or how he'd gotten there. He had minor scratches and bruises on his arms and legs, and his clothes were torn, but he showed no signs of having been attacked or restrained. He repeated the same phrase over and over during the ride to the ranger station. "They're still out there." Search teams launched immediately. They located the group's campsite 2 miles off the main trail. The tents were still standing, though one was partially collapsed. A campfire had burned down to ash. Cooking gear was laid out as if a meal had been interrupted. 3 sleeping bags were unzipped. 2 backpacks, James's and Danny's, were missing. Michael's was still inside his tent, undisturbed. The most striking detail was the trail of footprints leading away from the camp. Investigators found 3 sets at first: Michael's, James's, and Danny's. They were close together, moving uphill toward a dense grove of pines. About 150 yards from the tents, Michael's footprints separated and turned east, looping back toward camp. James's and Danny's continued forward. 50 yards later, Danny's prints vanished. They didn't fade, they simply stopped in the middle of the trail, as if he had stepped off the ground entirely. James's footprints continued another 100 yards. Then they too ended abruptly at a clearing with no signs of a struggle, no drag marks, and no sign of where he had gone. Search efforts lasted nearly 3 weeks. More than 60 volunteers, helicopters, tracking dogs, and even mounted patrol units scoured a 20 square mile radius. They found no bodies, no gear, and no clothing. Only one item was ever recovered: Danny's knife, driven deep into a tree trunk about a mile from camp. It was embedded at an odd angle and depth, requiring significant force to place there. No fingerprints were found on the handle. Michael's account was inconsistent and unsettling. He told investigators that on the second night they heard something moving in the woods. At first, it sounded like a person's slow, deliberate steps circling the camp, but when they shined a flashlight toward the sound, it stopped instantly. Later, around 2 a.m., they heard it again, closer this time. "It wasn't running or stalking," Michael said in one interview. "It was just pacing." On the 3rd night, he claimed they woke to find the forest too quiet. The usual night sounds, crickets, wind through the branches, even distant owls had gone completely still. Then faintly came a low, rhythmic hum. It wasn't mechanical, Michael insisted. It was like the ground was humming. Shortly after, James decided to investigate. Danny followed. Michael stayed behind. He said he waited for an hour before panic set in. When he finally left the tent to look for them, there was nothing. No sign of either man, no sounds, no movement. He returned to camp, slept until morning, then started walking east. He didn't stop walking until he reached the service road 5 days later. Medical evaluations revealed mild dehydration and fatigue, but no signs of psychological disturbance. However, neurocognitive testing noted memory gaps, roughly 48 hours, for which Michael could provide no clear account. He remembered leaving camp, but nothing about the days between then and his discovery. Hypothermia was ruled out. There was no evidence of head injury or substance use. Some investigators believed Michael's story was incomplete, possibly fabricated. Foul play was considered, but never substantiated. There was no motive, no evidence of a fight, and no signs of struggle at the site. Others suspected disorientation and panic, a common factor in wilderness disappearances, but that failed to explain the vanished footprints, the embedded knife, or the missing gear. There were other strange elements. Search teams reported encountering unusual magnetometer readings in a quarter-mile radius around the campsite. Brief, localized spikes with no clear cause. Several dogs refused to follow James's scent beyond the point where his footprints ended, circling instead and whining. A helicopter equipped with infrared sensors recorded a brief, concentrated heat signature in a clearing 2 miles north of camp, but when ground teams arrived 20 minutes later, there was nothing there. Michael eventually returned to his hometown and avoided interviews. He declined to speak publicly about the incident and refused to participate in later documentary projects. The last time he addressed the event was during a 1995 deposition related to a civil case filed by Danny's family. When asked what he thought happened, he paused for nearly a minute before answering, "I don't think they left. I think they're still there, just not where we are." The phrase vague and chilling became the unofficial name for the case, the High Hollow incident. It remains one of the most puzzling disappearances in the park's history, notable not only for the lack of physical evidence, but for the single survivor, whose account raised more questions than it answered. Today, the campsite is overgrown and unmarked. The trail they followed is barely visible, but the ranger station still holds a small evidence bag containing Danny's knife, its blade rusted, its origin still unexplained, and a case file that ends with a single line typed in capital letters, 2 men missing, 1 returned, circumstances unknown. The path that changed overnight. In the early summer of 1993, 2 lifelong friends, Mark Ellison and Samuel Sam Carter, both 28, set out to hike the Ridge Fire Loop, a 27-mile backcountry trail known for its sweeping views and steady terrain. The trail had existed in the same place since the 1942, mapped and remapped dozens of times, used by hikers, hunters, and park rangers without issue. Mark and Sam knew it well. They'd hiked it every June for nearly a decade and had taken pride in finishing it faster each year. By all accounts, they were confident, prepared, and deeply familiar with the land. That familiarity made what happened next even more difficult to explain. The 2 men left the main trailhead on June 4. They carried topographic maps, a GPS device, and enough provisions for a 4-day trip. Weather conditions were clear. They radioed a friend that evening from their first campsite, reporting nothing unusual. At 7:42 p.m. on June 5, they made their final check-in call from a ridge overlooking Blue Hollow Basin. They mentioned having seen a pair of elk, collecting water from a familiar spring, and planning to reach the East Loop by the next afternoon. Then, as far as the record shows, they vanished. When they missed their scheduled exit on June 8, a search and rescue operation began. Rangers located their vehicle at the trailhead and followed their expected route without difficulty until they reached Blue Hollow Basin, the last place they'd been heard from. There, something was wrong. The old, well-worn trail that should have continued east simply didn't exist. Instead, the path curved north into a steep incline that led nowhere. Survey flags from previous years were gone. Landmarks described in their notes, a dead cedar, a split boulder, a ridgeside outcrop were absent. In their place were thickets of young pine, some no more than a few years old, growing in ground that maps and aerial photos showed should have been open meadow. Rangers assumed they'd gone off trail and become lost. But GPS logs from their radio device, recovered from a ranger repeater station, told a stranger story. The last ping placed them 200 yards east of Blue Hollow Basin, squarely on the correct trail. Yet no trail existed there anymore. A second ping, recorded an hour later, placed them even farther east, in a location that, according to topographic surveys, was a sheer drop-off into a ravine. That was the final signal. Search teams expanded their operation over the next 3 weeks. Ground patrols swept 30 square miles. Helicopters equipped with infrared scanners mapped every ridge and valley. Divers searched the river at the base of the canyon. They found no trace of the missing men, not a scrap of clothing, not a fragment of gear, not a footprint. The search dogs, brought in on the second week, followed a faint scent for nearly half a mile east of the last ping, then stopped abruptly in the middle of an open clearing. The ground showed no signs of a struggle, no disturbed soil, no broken branches. The scent simply ended. What puzzled investigators most was the terrain itself. Survey teams brought in during the third week compared historical maps, ranger records, and satellite data. Something had changed. Tree growth patterns in a 2-square-mile area around Blue Hollow Basin did not match forest records. Several features that appeared in survey photographs from 1987, including a dry creek bed and an exposed granite wall, were gone, replaced by smooth earth and undergrowth. When questioned, veteran rangers who had patrolled the area for decades insisted that the landscape wasn't supposed to look like that. One ranger, speaking off the record, described the phenomenon bluntly. "It's like the map, and the ground stopped matching." Witness accounts added a layer of strangeness. A pair of hikers on the western edge of Ridgefire Loop reported hearing shouting from deep in the forest around 11 p.m. on June 5, distant but unmistakable. Another group camping 3 miles south described seeing a sudden glow near Blue Hollow around midnight, followed by what they thought was a landslide. But when searchers examined the slope, there were no signs of fallen rock or disturbed soil. The official explanation offered to the public was that the two men had taken a wrong turn, become lost in rough terrain, and succumbed to exposure. But the internal reports, many of which were never released, painted a more troubling picture. The disappearance of landmarks, the GPS data pointing to locations that no longer existed, the abrupt end of scent trails, none of it aligned with typical lost hiker cases. In 1995, 2 years after the disappearance, a park geologist conducting a soil study near Blue Hollow made a discovery that reignited interest in the case. Beneath 6 inches of pine duff, he uncovered the remains of an old trail marker, a rusted iron post with the inscription RF14, part of the original Ridgefire Loop network. The problem was its location. It lay nearly 400 yards from where the trail marker had been documented in 1989. The post had not been moved by flood or landslide. The soil layers were undisturbed. It appeared as if the ground itself had shifted around it. This finding led to new theories, none conclusive. Some geologists speculated that an undocumented landslide or slow subsidence event had altered the terrain, though no geological evidence supported that. Others suggested that dense regrowth, following a series of low-intensity fires in the late 1980 seconds, had obscured the landscape more thoroughly than expected, causing navigational errors. But that did not explain the vanished creek bed or the missing granite wall. Mark Ellison's father, a retired forestry engineer, offered his own theory in a letter to the Park Service. "Something changed out there, not over decades, but in a single night. My son knew that trail. He would not have walked into a canyon he had crossed dozens of times." Today, the section of Ridgefire Loop where Mark and Sam disappeared remains open, but largely untraveled. Most hikers now take a rerouted path that bypasses Blue Hollow entirely. The original trailhead still exists, but it leads only a few hundred yards before dead-ending into dense forest. Official maps still show the original loop, though a small notation now marks the section east of Blue Hollow. Trail conditions variable. No trace of Mark Ellison or Sam Carter has ever been found. Their disappearance remains one of the strangest in park records, not just because they vanished without a trace, but because the land itself seemed to change beneath their feet. Whether it was a mapping error, a geological event, or something else entirely, no one has been able to explain how two experienced hikers could follow a path they had walked countless times before and walk straight into a place that, by every map and memory, shouldn't have been there. The campsite that moved. The incident began as a routine patrol, the kind park rangers conduct thousands of times each year without incident. On the morning of the 26th of May 2008, Rangers Paul McCready and Lisa Novak hiked into the northern section of Blackwood Preserve, a heavily forested stretch of land closed to the public for the previous 2 weeks due to controlled burns and wildlife surveys. Their assignment was straightforward: inspect a temporary campsite established by a group of research volunteers, verify that it complied with safety protocols, and return before dusk. It was the kind of work both had done many times before, yet what they encountered that afternoon would leave them with questions that have never been answered. At 11:22 a.m., McCready and Novak arrived at the site, a small clearing bordered by dense spruce and aspen. Everything appeared in order. The volunteers' tents were neatly arranged around a stone-lined fire pit. Cooking equipment, a folding table, and 2 coolers sat beneath a tarp. A clothesline hung between 2 trees, with damp field shirts drying in the sun. Nearby, a weather balloon launcher and atmospheric sensors were positioned on tripods. McCready noted in his report that the area showed standard use patterns, nothing unusual. They spoke briefly with the 4 researchers present, confirmed their plans for the day, and left. The hike back took just over 2 hours. The rangers stopped for lunch near a stream and then began their return trip to the ranger station, following the same route they had taken in. But shortly after 3 p.m, they received a radio call from the station, informing them of a new assignment, a second inspection of the same site, this time to retrieve a misplaced piece of survey equipment. They turned around immediately and retraced their steps. They arrived back at the clearing at 4:11 p.m. The site was gone. Where the tents had stood was now a patch of bare earth scattered with pine needles. The fire pit was missing. The clothesline was gone. The tarp, the coolers, the table, all of it had vanished. There were no footprints, no drag marks, no tire tracks, and no signs of disturbance. Even the patch of ground where the fire pit had been dark and charred just hours earlier now showed fresh, undisturbed soil. It was as if nothing had ever been there, Macready later said, not even the imprint of a tent stake. At first, they assumed the volunteers had packed up and moved, but the campsite's location more than 6 miles from the nearest road made that unlikely. Moving such heavy equipment and gear through dense forest in under 3 hours would have been difficult even with a vehicle, and no vehicles were permitted or capable of accessing the area. Confused, the rangers radioed the research team's base. The reply deepened the mystery. None of the 4 researchers had checked in, and their satellite beacon, which had been transmitting from the campsite all morning, had stopped sending data at precisely 2:47 p.m, less than half an hour before the rangers returned. A search was launched immediately. Helicopters swept the area. Ground teams spread out from the clearing in a 10-mile radius. At 7:38 p.m, they made a discovery. The entire campsite tents, tables, sensors, and all had reappeared nearly half a mile away in a meadow that was not on any map trail. The layout was identical to what Macready and Novak had seen that morning, down to the placement of the folding table and the direction of the clothesline. Even the fire pit was there, still warm to the touch. But there was no sign of the 4 researchers. The relocation raised immediate questions. The new site was uphill, over uneven terrain, and through a section of forest so dense that dragging gear through it would have taken hours. Yet there were no drag marks, no broken branches, and no indication that the equipment had been physically carried. Even stranger, the soil beneath the tents was compacted as if they had been set up there for days rather than hours. Search teams combed the forest for the missing researchers for 3 weeks. They found nothing. No footprints, no discarded gear, no clothing, no signs of animal activity. A single item, a clipboard, containing field notes was discovered, wedged between 2 rocks on the edge of a nearby ridge. The last entry, time-stamped 2:44 p.m, read only, "We hear it again, closer this time." An internal investigation considered a range of explanations. One theory suggested the team had panicked after encountering a predator and relocated the camp before disappearing. But the absence of tracks, the compacted soil, and the still warm fire pit contradicted that. Another theory proposed that someone else, possibly a group of unauthorized visitors, had moved the camp, but no secondary footprints, tire tracks, or debris supported this. A more speculative idea proposed that the volunteers had attempted to conduct some kind of experiment that had gone wrong. However, none of the recovered notes, sensor logs, or equipment data indicated such activity. One detail particularly unsettled investigators. In the soil near the relocated camp, they found a series of concentric impressions, shallow rings, each precisely 2 inches apart, radiating outward from the center of the fire pit. They appeared to have been formed by intense pressure, yet there was no evidence of machinery or tools. When cast in plaster, the rings formed a perfect geometric pattern that analysts could not explain. Today, the Blackwood Preserve incident remains one of the most confounding disappearances in park history. The site of the original camp shows no sign it ever existed. The relocated campsite was eventually removed and catalogued as evidence, though the gear yielded no clues. The clipboard and its final note, "We hear it again, closer this time," remains in the park's cold case archive, its meaning debated but never understood. No trace of the 4 researchers has ever surfaced. Their families still hold annual vigils near the meadow where their camp reappeared, leaving lanterns burning through the night. The case is officially classified as missing presumed deceased. But for those who have studied it, one fact stands above all others. In the span of less than 3 hours, an entire campsite moved half a mile through dense forest without a single piece of evidence to explain how or why. The vanishing coordinates. It was a perfect morning for hiking, clear skies, low winds, and temperatures hovering around 68 degrees, when 4 friends set out from the base of Granite Vale Ridge on the 29th of August 2015. All in their early 30s, they were seasoned backcountry hikers with years of experience navigating remote terrain. The group brothers Jason and Kyle Moore, along with friends Rachel Quinn and Ethan Miles, had chosen a challenging but familiar route along a high spine of rock that offered sweeping views of the valley below. It was a trip they had completed twice before, without incident. They expected to return in 3 days. They never did. The first day went as planned. They checked in with family members via satellite text that evening, sending photos of the Ridgeline sunset and reporting that all was well. On the second day, at precisely 2:16 p.m, they sent another message, a set of GPS coordinates, and a short note made it to the top, heading down in the morning. The coordinates placed them at an elevation of 7,940 feet, near a narrow ridge shelf known locally as Falcon's Rest. It was a well-known vantage point, exposed but stable, and marked the halfway point of their route. It was the last anyone ever heard from them. When the group failed to check in the following afternoon, family members alerted the Park Service. A search team was dispatched to Falcon's Rest that evening, guided by the exact coordinates the hikers had sent. They expected to find a campsite, or at least signs of their presence, boot prints, a fire ring, discarded gear. Instead, they found nothing. The ridge was bare, not just empty bare. There were no footprints, no discarded wrappers, no marks on the ground to indicate where tents had been pitched, no scuffing from hiking poles, no depressions in the soil. Even the patches of loose gravel near the edge, which should have shifted underfoot, were undisturbed. It was as though no one had been there in months. At first, searchers assumed they had misread the coordinates. They double-checked, then they checked again. Every reading matched. They were standing in the exact location the hikers had transmitted less than 24 hours earlier. But the ground offered no evidence that anyone had ever been there at all. Helicopters scanned the ridge and nearby valleys. Ground teams fanned out along potential descent routes. They found a single water bottle, clean and upright, wedged between rocks a half-mile north of Falcon's Rest. It contained no fingerprints. A thermal drone sweep the following morning detected 3 brief heat anomalies, roughly 300 meters west of the ridge, but they vanished within minutes and could not be replicated. The most perplexing discovery came on the 3rd day of the search. Roughly 600 feet below Falcon's Rest, near a narrow ledge overlooking a sheer drop, investigators found a small pile of stones arranged into a deliberate stack, a cairn. At its base was a single laminated trail map, folded neatly, with a handwritten message in faint pencil. "Still here, keep looking." Handwriting experts later confirmed the note was likely written by Rachel Quinn, but there were no footprints, no handprints, and no other signs of human presence in the area. Even the loose sand around the cairn was undisturbed. Investigators began piecing together a timeline based on what little they had. The group was last confirmed alive at 2:16 p.m. on August 30. Their GPS beacon continued to transmit periodically until 3:41 p.m., after which it stopped abruptly. Satellite phone pings between 4 and 4:12 p.m. showed attempts to connect to a network, all unsuccessful. Then nothing. The device was never located. Several puzzling environmental anomalies were also recorded in the search logs. Compass readings fluctuated wildly within a quarter-mile radius of Falcon's Rest, swinging up to 40 degrees off true north, before stabilizing again. 2 search drones experienced simultaneous GPS dropouts in the same area. A park geologist noted an unusual magnetic spike on handheld instruments, short, intense, and gone within seconds. These readings were never explained. Witnesses added another strange layer to the case. A hiking group on a neighboring ridge reported seeing 4 figures on Falcon's Rest around 5 p.m., roughly 2 hours after the final message was sent. They appeared to be standing close together, possibly waving. When the witnesses looked again less than a minute later, the figures were gone. The distance made details hard to confirm, but the timeline matched when the group should still have been there. Theories abounded, but failed to fit the evidence. One suggested the hikers attempted a risky descent and fell, but extensive searches of the slopes and canyon floor revealed no bodies, no gear, and no signs of impact. Another proposed that they continued farther along the ridge and became lost, yet none of the exit trails showed signs of use. The possibility of foul play was raised and quickly dismissed. There was no sign anyone else had been in the area. One internal report marked speculative and never released to the public raised a different possibility. It noted that all known data points to the sudden loss of GPS signal, the magnetic disturbances, the absence of trace evidence clustered within a 300-meter radius of Falcon's Rest. It is possible, the report stated, that the event which removed the subjects from the location was localized, transient, and total. What that event might have been was left undefined. By October, the search was scaled back. Snowfall soon buried the ridge, and with it, any remaining clues. The cairn and the map were recovered and catalogued as evidence. The note, "Still here, keep looking," remains the only physical link to what happened. Today, hikers still visit Falcon's Rest. Many pause where the coordinates place the missing group and look out across the valley below. It is a breathtaking view, the same one Jason, Kyle, Rachel, and Ethan must have seen before they vanished. But the ground remains as it was the day rescuers first arrived, untouched, undisturbed, and empty. 4 people were there, they said so themselves, and yet, by the time help arrived, there was no sign they had ever existed at all. The river that remembers. It began as a backcountry paddling trip, part river expedition, part wilderness, camping the kind that takes days to complete and requires careful planning. On the 14th of June 2011, 4 friends, Laura Hastings, 31, Andrew McAllister, 32, siblings Daniel and Sarah Price, 27 and 29, launched their kayaks into the twisting waters of the Clearwater River, a remote waterway deep within a restricted section of the park. They planned a 7-day journey downstream, stopping to camp along the riverbanks each night. All 4 were seasoned outdoors people. Laura and Andrew had led similar trips for an outdoor education program. The Price siblings were experienced river guides. They were confident and well prepared. For the first 3 days, their satellite messages came through on schedule. They described calm water conditions, successful campsites, and sightings of elk along the banks. The 4th night's message, however, was different. Sent at 9:54 p.m., it contained only 5 words. "We keep hearing them again." It was followed by a second, garbled transmission less than 20 minutes later. Voices across the water, then silence. When they missed their scheduled pickup downstream 2 days later, a search was launched. Helicopters began scanning the river corridor, and search boats were dispatched from both upstream and downstream. The first sign of the missing party came 11 miles from their last known position. 3 kayaks, tethered neatly to a fallen tree at the river's edge. Inside were paddles, sealed dry bags, and personal gear. The 4th kayak was located a quarter-mile downstream, lightly wedged into a sandbar. None showed signs of capsizing, but what investigators found on the nearby riverbank was stranger still. The group's final campsite was set up exactly as it should have been. Tents pitched, a fire pit still warm, and cooking pots arranged beside a log. 2 folding chairs faced the water. A kettle sat on the coals, blackened but full. Footprints led down to the river's edge, then stopped. There were no prints returning to camp, no drag marks, and no indication that anyone had re-entered the water. It was as if the 4 had stepped into the current and vanished. A search perimeter was quickly established. Divers swept the waters for miles downstream. Ground teams scoured the forest on both sides. Infrared-equipped helicopters made repeated passes over the dense canopy. Nothing, no clothing, no remains, not even a fragment of equipment was ever recovered. The only clue came from an object found tucked beneath a rock near the campfire, a small waterproof pouch containing 11 pages torn from a leather-bound journal. The pages were written in a different hand from any of the missing campers. They were brittle and yellowed with age. The first page was dated the 12th of June 1932. The final entry ended mid-sentence. "They come at night, not from above, but from the river itself." This discovery prompted a deep dive into park archives. Investigators found that in 1932, a party of 3 prospectors vanished from the same stretch of the Clearwater. Their campsite, discovered days later, had been nearly identical intact, undisturbed, with footprints leading into the water. None of their bodies were ever found. The journal recovered from the 2011 site appeared to belong to one of those men, a theory supported by handwriting analysis. How those pages ended up beneath a campfire rock almost 80 years later was never explained. Witness accounts added another layer of confusion. A pair of anglers, 5 miles downstream, reported hearing shouting or singing coming from upriver late on the night of June 18 hours after the group's last known message. Another witness, a ranger stationed at a fire lookout tower, claimed to have heard faint, overlapping voices echoing along the canyon walls shortly before midnight. though no other signs of human activity were visible. Investigators explored every possible explanation. They considered the chance that one of the party members had fallen into the water and the others had followed in a rescue attempt. But the river was calm that night, with no significant rapids. They considered animal attack, but there were no signs of disturbance, no blood, and no tracks. Foul play was briefly examined and dismissed. There was no evidence of other people in the area. Theories outside the official report were stranger. A hydrologist consulted by the park suggested that the river's subterranean tributaries, narrow sinkholes, and underwater channels might have pulled the paddlers beneath the surface. But the clear water's flow rate and depth did not support that hypothesis. Others noted the similarity to older disappearances in the same region: 3 prospectors in 1932, 2 surveyors in 1958, and a research pair in 1974, all vanishing near the same 3-mile stretch of river, all leaving their camps intact. The most unsettling detail was discovered weeks after the search was suspended. 20 miles downstream, a fisherman found a sealed dry bag snagged in a tangle of driftwood. Inside was a camera belonging to Sarah Price. The memory card contained 47 images. Most were ordinary photos of the river, the camp, and the group smiling beside their kayaks. But the final 4, taken after sunset on the night of June 18, showed something different. The first depicted a faint line of mist rising from the center of the river. The second and third, taken moments apart, showed what appeared to be several thin, vertical shapes, like columns breaking the surface. The final photo was blurred and partially obscured by motion, but one detail was visible in the corner: the edge of a folding chair and a kettle beside a fire. The timestamp read 9:58 p.m., just minutes after their last message. The site has since earned an unofficial name among rangers: the river that remembers. It is avoided by most water expeditions, and no overnight permits are issued for that stretch anymore. Yet it continues to draw quiet speculation. The journal from 1932 is kept in a sealed archive. The camera images are classified in the case file, and the footprints that ended at the water's edge, like those left by the prospectors, the surveyors, and the researchers before them, remain the only physical trace of those who vanished. No one knows what happened to the 4 kayakers. Perhaps they slipped into the current, perhaps something pulled them under, or perhaps, as the journal suggests, they stepped into something older, something that moves not just with water, but with memory, returning again and again to the same stretch of river, waiting for those who camp too close to its edge. The lake that swallowed the camp. It was one of the most remote campsites in the region, a narrow strip of ground along the southern shore of Lake Ardea, a glacial lake high in the northern range. Reaching it required a 12-mile hike through dense conifer forest, followed by a steep climb over a rocky moraine. Few visitors ever made the trip, which was precisely why 4 friends, Clara Jennings, 30, her fiancé Mark Willis, 32, and siblings Olivia and Thomas Reed, 28 and 35, chose it as their destination. They planned a week-long stay in the summer of 2002, fishing, camping, and exploring the secluded lakeshore. All 4 were experienced backcountry hikers. Their permit was valid from July 17 to July 24. None of them were ever seen again. The last confirmed sighting of the group came on July 18, when another hiking party passed them on the trail, roughly 3 miles from the lake. They reported the 4 in good spirits and well prepared. The weather was stable, clear skies, low wind, and temperatures around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. A ranger patrolling the area later spotted smoke from a small campfire near the lake's southern edge, confirming they had reached their planned destination. But on July 24, when they failed to return, a search began. The first helicopter sweep located what looked like a campsite near the water's edge. When ground teams arrived the following morning, however, they found something that defied explanation. The site was gone. The shoreline itself had changed. The strip of land, where their tents should have been a small gravel beach above the waterline, was now submerged under nearly 4 feet of water. The trees nearest the shore were standing in the lake. A ring of stones marking a fire pit was visible beneath the surface. Investigators examined the surrounding terrain. According to topographical surveys taken just 6 months earlier, the shoreline at that location had been stable for decades. No significant snowmelt or rainfall had occurred in the days prior. Hydrologists calculated that to raise the water level enough to submerge the campsite, the lake would have required nearly 11 million additional gallons, an impossible volume for the isolated watershed to accumulate in a matter of days. Yet the waterline had clearly risen. Divers entered the lake and located scattered traces of the group's presence: a cooking pot, a section of tent pole, and a metal cup resting on the lake bed about 15 feet from shore. They also found something else: a single tree trunk, uprooted and lying horizontally beneath the water, its roots pointing toward the surface. The tree showed no signs of storm damage or decay. It appeared to have been wrenched from the ground with significant force and deposited underwater. Searchers combed the perimeter of the lake for additional clues. About 200 yards from the original campsite, they found a set of footprints, 2 pairs, leading away from the water and into a stand of spruce. The tracks continued for roughly 40 yards before stopping abruptly in soft moss. There were no signs of a fall, no scuff marks, and no secondary trail. They simply ended. A second anomaly was discovered near the lake's northern inlet. A section of shoreline nearly 60 feet long showed signs of rapid subsidence. The ground had sunk by almost a foot, forming a shallow bowl-shaped depression. Soil analysis revealed that the sediment layers had shifted recently, but there was no evidence of seismic activity or glacial movement to explain the change. Investigators began exploring possible explanations. One theory proposed that an underground channel had collapsed, allowing groundwater to flood into the lake and raise its level. But geological surveys showed no evidence of cavities or aquifers beneath the basin. Another suggestion was a sudden release of meltwater from a nearby snowfield, yet weather data indicated that temperatures had remained steady and no nearby snowpack had melted significantly in weeks. Rangers also considered the possibility that the campers had simply moved to higher ground and become lost. But no secondary campsite was ever found, and none of their larger gear stoves, sleeping bags, or packs were recovered. Moreover, there was no evidence they had attempted to hike out. Their food cache, stored in a bear-proof container above the lake, remained untouched. A witness report from July 19, initially dismissed, took on new significance as the investigation unfolded. A pair of anglers on the lake's western shore reported hearing a deep, rumbling sound around 2 a.m., followed by what they described as a splashing or rushing noise, though the water appeared calm when they investigated at dawn. Later that same night, a remote seismic sensor roughly 2 miles from the lake registered a low-frequency vibration lasting nearly 40 seconds. No earthquake was recorded anywhere in the region. Weeks into the search, a final clue surfaced. About half a mile downstream from Lake Ardea's outflow, a park ranger discovered a single red nylon strap, part of a backpack harness, tangled around a branch, protruding from the riverbank. It had been torn cleanly in half. No other evidence was found. By late August, the search was suspended. Officially, the disappearance of the Jennings, Willis Reed party was attributed to an environmental event, though no evidence of a landslide, flood, or collapse could be found. Unofficially, investigators admitted they had no explanation. The most widely accepted theory remains that a sudden shift in the lake's subsurface structure caused localized flooding, submerging the camp and potentially sweeping the group into the water. But without bodies, gear, or additional evidence, the explanation is only speculation. Today, Lake Ardea is avoided by most campers. The shoreline remains higher than historical records indicate, and the drowned fire ring is still visible beneath the water on clear days. Some claim the water occasionally ripples even when the air is still, or that a faint, low sound can be heard from beneath the surface at night. No new permits are issued for the southern shore, and the location of the lost campsite is now listed on park maps only as closed, unstable ground. The 4 who camped there are still missing. Their tents, their gear, and the land itself vanished beneath the water. And the lake, swollen beyond reason, shifting in ways no hydrologist can explain, continues to hold its silence. For decades, officials have insisted there's nothing unusual about these disappearances, that people simply get lost, fall, drown, or wander too far. But time and again, the details refuse to fit. Campsites left untouched, fires still warm, messages typed but never sent, and traces that end where they never should, and still there are no answers. Somewhere out there, beyond the marked trails and visitor maps, something is happening that no official report will name. Whether it's natural, human, or something else entirely, the truth remains hidden beneath layers of silence and bureaucracy. If you want to see what they won't explain, if you want to keep pulling at the threads they hope you ignore, then stay with us. Join us as we follow the next case, the next mystery, and the next set of questions no one in power seems willing to answer.